Hello everyone and welcome to my live stream. I'm thrilled to be here sharing some of my top baking tips, and this is going to be, I want this to be a video that you go back to when you just want those little bits of information that just make your baking day easier and you feel like a pro, and it makes you want to get into the kitchen and start baking because you just have these little tips that are time savers or that get you out of a troublesome situation. Because as we know, when it comes to baking, 90% of the satisfaction we feel is because we've either prevented a disaster, or should a disaster happen, we know how to get ourselves out of it. And then at the end of your bake, you feel fantastic. Now, talking about feeling fantastic, I have a new travel series right here on the Oh Yum channel. And speaking of travel, hello Suzanne in Barbados. I hope you're having a wonderful holiday there. Thank you for joining us. Hermione, nice to see you. Of course, I always have to say hello to my mom and dad in Michino. They may not be watching live, but I know they'll pick this up later. Kathy, you're probably joining us, and I see we've got people from Australia, from Malaysia. It is so good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're joining me. So back to food travel diaries. I have had the fortune this past year to get back to traveling. I hope some of you have as well. And in addition to visiting Turkey and visiting Italy and spending some time in France, I had the pleasure of visiting Yuma, Arizona. And this was a special trip so that I could visit the Natural Delights date groves and actually participate in a date harvest. The medjool dates, when you buy them in the store, are a fresh fruit. They come off the tree looking exactly like you buy them in the store. To me, that was mind-blowing. So you need to check out Anna's Food Travel Diaries right here on the channel. Each episode, I feature some of my travel adventures, but you know I'm always going to end up right here in this kitchen sharing a delicious recipe for you. And for that particular episode, it is a chocolate and spice medjool date cake that is phenomenal. And outside of that, I have a hot tip for making a flawless cream cheese frosting. But you have to go to the video for that tip. I'm going to get into 5 of my top baking tips. And I am pretty sure I'm going to be back with 5 more and 5 more later. But one of the first tips I want to cover is how to fix over-whipped egg whites. Now this happens all the time, and hello from Colombia, Malaysia, Philippines. Thank you for writing. I will take your questions throughout this. But let's talk about over-whipped egg whites. Now you see some recipes call for soft peak, some medium peak, some stiff peak. Most often, it's a softer medium peak. It's rare that a recipe needs a stiff peak because that is pushing your egg whites to their limits. The protein in egg whites, when they whip, they stretch to hold in that air and that volume, and that's why meringue is so magical and fun to work with. But if you over whip your egg whites, that means you've pushed those egg whites to their maximum limits, that should you start folding those whipped egg whites into a chocolate mousse, making a pavlova, or working them into something that goes into the oven, they're at their most fragile. They'll collapse as you're folding them, and with the heat of the oven, when air expands, it pushes those egg whites, and your cake may start lifting in the oven, but because those egg whites are collapsing, oh, it will sink. And so, you're saying, well, that's all wonderful. Now I know why not to use over-whipped egg whites, but it happens to everyone. Pros and amateur bakers, everyone accidentally leaves the mixer going that extra 30 seconds. It doesn't take long, and you've over-whipped your egg whites. So the first thing to do is recognize what an over-whipped egg white looks like. And so I've over-whipped some for you. I have added some sugar. And you can see here how they're not smooth and fluffy, but they have a very rough sort of sea foam look to them. That is the sign you've over whipped your egg whites. Now, do note, when you're whipping egg whites without sugar, they will reach that over whipped state a lot faster, so keep an eye on your mixer. And even when not over whipped, when they sit for a few minutes, they may have that craggy look, and all you have to do is give them a little stir to bring them back. But the fix for your over whipped egg whites, I'm gonna put it back on the mixer, is to go make a cup of tea. And you're thinking, well, what is Anna gonna use that tea for? Nope. Even if you've added sugar to your egg whites, you've got your oven preheated, your other elements ready before you use those egg whites, go make a cup of tea. The time it takes for you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, sit down, drink the tea, so give yourselves about 10, 15 minutes. Those egg whites, because they're over whipped, will collapse on themselves. And you'll find at the bottom of your mixing bowl, you'll get a little pool of liquid, because as the egg whites start collapsing, that pool of liquid will build. Then your fix is on low speed, not high speed, on a low or one step up from low. You whisk the egg whites back up to the point that you missed the first time around. I see we have a little pixelation. We did do a tech check yesterday, so we know our signal is good. We're running strong, so I am going to stay with you. Hello from Kazakhstan and from Connecticut. I love this. I love getting notes from around the world. So I'm going to leave these egg whites to sit a few minutes, show you a few more tips, and come back to them just so you can see the difference after about 10 minutes. So now on to my second top baking tip, how to line your pans easily and effortlessly, saying the word is more difficult, with parchment paper. And a lot of people, when it comes to cutting a circle to line the bottom of their cake pan, will pull out their magic marker and trace it, or a pencil. You don't really want to introduce ink, and it also takes a little time, and you get marker or pencil on your pans. But here is an easy way to line your round baking pan, and then I'll show you for a square, with parchment paper, whether you grease it or not. So I have I'm just gonna move this one square out of the way, a square of parchment paper. So however you buy it, in a roll or sheets, you wanna cut a nice square piece. Then you fold the square in half. You fold it into, hello, Cape Town, South Africa. You fold it into quarters. Oh, we've got a few people joining us from South Africa and from New York as well, and Germany. Oh, I love hearing where you're all from. And these baking tips work around the world. They are not just for North America. So now I've got folded almost like a napkin. I've got my paper in quarters. Then I fold it again, and one last time. So this point marks the center of that square. Then you take your piece of your baking pan upside down. You put that point in the center of the circle and just mark with your finger the outside of the pan. Give it a little cut. And then you open up your beautiful circle of parchment paper and drop it right in. Takes no time, easy. You can even use this to line the sides if you need to. So that's the round pan. Now to line a square pan easily, or a 9x13, a rectangle pan, you start the same way, folding your square of parchment. Make sure your square of parchment is wider than just the base, because it's easy enough to cut a square for the bottom. But when you want to line the bottom and the sides easily, you make sure that it's that full length of the two sides plus the bottom. You fold the parchment like a napkin again. Then on the open ends, you cut in like so, so that when you bring your square pan to put in place, and I like to do it upside down, just that way it sits in place, those cut open points will overlap over each other. And in one move, and without wasting excess parchment paper, you've lined the bottoms and sides. So when you bake your squares, your brownies, what have you in here, boom, it's easy to pull out. And also that double fold over at the corners helps prevent leaks. So especially if you're making something delicate like a lemon square that's got a liquid topping that has to bake, you'll have less leaking on the edges and sides. Works great for butter tart squares. That's a very Canadian treat, and if you've never had a butter tart square, you have to look right here on the channel. I have a fabulous recipe. You want to have some maple syrup on hand if you're going to make those butter tart squares. All right, so that's tip number 2. Now let's go on to tip number 3. We've got, oh, hello from Ethiopia, hello Malaysia, and we've got Cooking with Virginia in Saskatoon. Hello Saskatoon, you're up early. Oh, well, you're welcome. Making bagels and cookies. And we've got tons more recipes coming up on the channel. Each week, there's a new episode of Food Travel Diaries. Okay, tip number 1, the over-whipped egg whites, which I will come back to. Tip number 2 was lining your baking pans. Tip number 3, brown sugar, fixing your brown sugar. If you're not baking on a regular basis, or perhaps you forgot to package your brown sugar in an airtight container, it can dry out over time. And you've pulled out all your ingredients, you're ready to make chocolate chip cookies, and you go to your brown sugar canister and it's a rock. How do you re-moisten your brown sugar? I've got a couple of fixes for you, and all are depending on your level of urgency. So if you need that brown sugar right away, what you can do if you have a microwave, pop it in the microwave for just 10-15 seconds. That will rehydrate the brown sugar. You have to use it immediately. It will go back to being hard after it cools again. So at least it allows you to get it into your measuring cup and into your recipe. If you've got 24 hours, what you want to do is take a slice of apple, drop it into your brown sugar canister, cover it back up again. The moisture from the apple in 24 hours will rehydrate your brown sugar, bring it back to just like it was when you first opened the package. Then after 24 hours, this is important, you take out the apple and you simply put in a slice of stale bread, just a little piece like this. This is the end of a flaxseed loaf I happen to have. That goes in your bin. Now this can stay in your canister for a month to 2 months. It won't go moldy. The moisture is in the brown sugar is giving back to the bread gives it back to the brown sugar, and it just keeps that even hydration. If you really need to keep your brown sugar longer because you're not going to be baking all that often, then you can pick up one of those unglazed terracotta discs. Sometimes they come in cute little shapes like teddy bears or puppies, and you can drop that into your canister, and the terracotta keeps your brown sugar moist for even longer. But now that holiday baking season is here, I bet you're going to be moving through the brown sugar a whole lot faster. So we're talking about some fundamental ingredient tips as we move along. The next one I'd like to share relates to eggs. So in talking about eggs for a little bit, a question I get often is, what temperature should my eggs be when I'm baking? And the great tip is use your butter as your guide. When a recipe calls for room temperature butter, that's your guide that your other ingredients should also be at room temperature. Ingredients of a like temperature incorporate better together, especially if you're dealing with something like a cake batter that becomes more fluid as you keep adding liquid ingredients to it. And if you're making something like a scone dough or something that calls for cold butter, then your eggs and your other ingredients should be cold. Now, what happens to me all the time, and I'm sure it happens to you, is you're ready to bake something. Say I was talking about chocolate chip cookies with the brown sugar, and you never want to bake chocolate chip cookies and eat them a whole lot later. You want to eat them right away. But if you didn't pull out your eggs to warm up to room temperature, because here in North America, we store our eggs refrigerated. I know in other countries they're sold and stored at room temperature, but here in North America they're cold. If you're pulling your eggs right from the fridge to warm them up quickly, just immerse them in their shells in a bowl full of hot tap water, not boiling water, but hot tap water. And I give it about 2 minutes for 2 eggs. If you're making a bigger recipe that is calling for 5 or 6 eggs, bigger bowl, more water, and you may want to change out the water once or twice because, of course, the cold eggs will cool down that water. Then you have your room temperature eggs, and the room temperature eggs are especially important for something like a sponge cake, or if you want to whip your egg whites. A room temperature egg white whips to a higher volume and faster when it is at room temperature. So while we're at it, I've got my eggs in the bowl. I'll give you a little tip on how to do the one-handed egg crack, just in case you feel like showing off. The reason I want to show you too is it's handy if it saves you from getting egg everywhere. Of course, when you start separating your eggs, you're going to have to stop and wash your hands, but it means you're keeping one hand clean, and it can become quicker to do after a while, after you've had a bit of practice. So the first thing is how you hold the egg when you crack it. And when you want to crack your egg, you know, you've probably seen on the channel, I always crack my egg on a flat surface. That way I get a clean break. It makes the eggshell break off with fewer small eggshell fragments. Then you run less of a risk of getting eggshell in your batter. And then you hold it over the bowl. But what you want to do is you're going to be pulling the shell apart. So your index finger and thumb should rest on one end of the egg, and then you're nesting the bottom half of the egg in your remaining fingers. So it's almost like using chopsticks. It's only these 2 fingers that are going to pull the front of the eggshell away when you crack. So I can't do this in slow motion, but I know Michael's got the camera on so we can see it. You ready, Michael? Oh, hi, Juno. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. Oh, and good evening in Singapore. Oh, everlasting. What happened to my ingredient drawers before I get to the one-handed egg crack? That was from my other series, Bake. That wasn't actually my home kitchen. We taped that series in a studio, so it all got packed away. I do love them, but here at home, I use canisters just like everyone else, though I would love those drawers if I had space for them here. Okay. Oh, Cherry, nice to see you. Welcome back. It's been ages. Chef didn't know. I'm glad you just found time to fit in, but you haven't missed too much. You can always come back and rewatch this video. Just the last tip. This, of course, will live on the channel within moments of my completing it. Okay, did I build up enough drama? Let's get back to the one-handed egg crack. And pull. So you could see that I pulled the top of the shell. I'll do one more, but I was holding the base secure.
Can you give me some more space?
Michael needs... What's in the way?
Sugar's in the way.
Sugar.
What's this?
This?
Yeah.
Yogurt. I'll move my yogurt out of the way. Okay, is that good? I'll move my apples out of the way too. Bring them back. All right, now Michael's going for the close-up. 1, 2, 3. Oh, and I got a shell. But you get the idea that you can see how I'm pulling with these 2 fingers the top of the egg away and letting gravity do all the work. I will have to make some eggs for breakfast since it is morning here in the beautiful Niagara region. How's everyone doing? I'm taking a look at the thread. Do you see what's baking today? I'm sharing my top baking tips, and we've got a good number of people. We've got 200 people, Michael, joining us at this hour in the morning. That's great. That means I always have to put the call out. Let's go for the likes. Let's get up to 200 likes, and I know we're doing great. Juna, my live streams, in addition to this live stream, I will be back on November 21st with a live stream, and then 2 holiday baking live streams in December. So stay tuned for that. My next baking tip, you know what? I'm going to take a peek at my egg whites now to see if they've settled a bit. Yeah, we're starting to get a little bit. I'll pull it over, Michael, so you can see a little liquid at the bottom of the mixing bowl, you can see how the eggs are kind of slipping and sliding around the bottom of the bowl because they are starting to collapse and let off liquid. So I think I can even bring them back by hand. I'm not even going to use the mixer. Yep, there we go. So you can see as I'm mixing it, the egg whites are going to break down, and then I'll be able to build them back up again to use. So see, I've got a softness there. So you don't have to throw out your egg whites if you've over whipped them. You just let them sit, let the weight of them collapse on themselves, then you bring them back to the point you missed the first time around. So this is a great time to move on to how to fix your over whipped whipped cream, because the tip is different, because the ingredients are different. Egg whites are all about the protein, cream is about the fat. And if you've accidentally over whipped your whipped cream because you just look away from your beaters or your mixer for a second, and all of a sudden your cream loses that fluffy look and starts getting dense and almost turns a butter yellow, because should you keep whipping, you would end up making butter. That is the fat separating from the whey, the fat bonding together. And if you eat over whipped whipped cream, it will taste greasy on the palate, and you'll see little specks if you're folding it into a recipe. So that's why you don't want to use your over whipped cream. But the easy way to fix it, and I've over whipped some here, I'm just going to give it a little more of an over whipping by hand. You can tell when you're getting close to over whipping your cream because it does change from sort of a natural white color to all of a sudden taking on a little more of a butter color. So there, it's my cream. I know it's white on white. Can you see clearly enough, Michael? It's a little difficult. Do you want me to put a little color behind it? I've got a, does that help a bit? Not much. But what we're looking, it's more about the consistency. You can see that it's not so smooth anymore. Your fix for over whipped cream is to add back a little bit of fluid whipping cream. So the key is, if you have a habit of over whipping your whipped cream, don't put the whole container into your mixer. Hold back just a tablespoon, 15 ml or so, and you add your fluid cream to the cream. And then either on low speed or by hand, that cream dissolves the bonded fat globules of your over whipped cream, and see how that's smoothed right away. Oh, and we've got someone whose mother says, Guten Morgen. Well, good morning to you too. Nice notes from everyone from Pakistan. Hello. If you have any questions, please do ask them. I'm sharing my top baking tips, but if you have other questions, I welcome them at the same time. Oh, we're getting close to our 200 likes. So there is the whipped cream fix. Add a little bit of fluid cream to your over whipped cream. Whisk it by hand or on low speed to redissolve it, so then you are not wasting ingredients. You do not have to start again. So we've covered egg whites, we've covered cracking an egg, brown sugar, over whipped cream, lining with parchment paper. Those are my 5 top tips, and I'm going to recap what those tips are at the end before I sign off. But what I wanted to share with you now is just a quick recipe using medjool dates, because as I mentioned at the top of this live stream, I have a brand new series right here on the Oh Yum channel called Anna's Food Travel Diaries, and I am traveling everywhere. This week's episode is going to be chocolate pasta. Now, you definitely are going to want to watch that episode, but if you love chocolate, you're going to want to see the episode that is just launched last week, where I make a chocolate and spice medjool date cake after being inspired visiting the date harvest in Yuma, Arizona at Natural Delights. It was absolutely amazing. So on the way to Yuma, Arizona, I was traveling with Michael, and all that beautiful camera work you see in the video and the drone shots. Michael got a drone. Sorry, we don't have the drone in the kitchen. That's all Michael doing that filming. But on our way to Yuma, Arizona, and it was hot, we stopped and had a date shake. And that is very popular in that area. And it's just simply ice cream with fresh medjool dates and blended together. And I thought, well, that's a treat. And you've got my chocolate cake recipe to make as a treat. But I thought, because it's morning here in Niagara, I would make us a date smoothie. So you're relying on the natural sweetness and of the dates to sweeten it. So I'm not adding other sugar. And of course, dates are packed with fiber. I moved my yogurt over. So this is simple. You don't even need a recipe written down. I know you can figure this out. I have plain yogurt here, any fat. You could use Greek yogurt, of course, if you want, or Turkish yogurt if you're watching from Turkey. I know yogurt is just ubiquitous there. I've cut up a whole apple and I'm leaving the skins on. That goes in. And I've got pitted medjool dates here. And I want to add about 2 cups. So the pits are easy to remove. These have already had the pits removed. But to remove the pit from a medjool date, you just slice down and open. And the pit is already separated from the fruit because it ripens on the tree. And in goes 2 cups loosely. You know, it's a smoothie. You don't need to measure precisely. We can always have room for one more. This is enough smoothie for both Michael and I. I'm going to add some milk. And would you mind grabbing the ice from the freezer, Michael? Thank you. Pouring in some milk. But of course, you could use dairy-free products. If you wanted to use a coconut-based yogurt or almond milk, I'll leave that up to you. I'll add some ice. I do like a frozen smoothie. I know some people like just the goods, but I like working in a little bit of ice. And for flavor, I'm going to add a touch of cinnamon. That could easily be vanilla. But I like the cinnamon with the apple and the dates. It kind of gives the smoothie an autumn flair, almost like an apple date square taste to it. And then my last addition, I love adding almond butter. That last kick of protein in there. And we'll give this a blitz while I take a look at the question. Michelle, you're asking a baking question. Oh, there, we've got a note from Prescott, Arizona. 90 minutes south of the Grand Canyon. Well, hello. That is so cool to know. Hi, Michelle. But back to the question about confectionery sugar. I don't like the taste of commercial brands, or do you make your own? Michelle, confectionery sugar, also known as icing sugar, powdered sugar, you can make your own by using a high power. You need a high power blender, or depending if you have access, Thermomix blends icing sugar. The difference is commercial icing sugar has starch added to it to keep it from clumping. So you can grind your own. You have to use it immediately if you're going to grind your own, or you add your own starch. The percentage can be about 1 to 2%. So you'd have to play with that number. So I hope that answers your question. So if you have a sugar you like to use, that's what you do. You can grind it, but you do need the high power tool to do it. Cherry is asking, does mango go well with dates and cinnamon? Sure would. Oh yeah, Michael's nodding his head. Yes, please. Any fruit you want to put in there. Pineapple, banana. I'm going for apple because it is autumn here in Niagara and apples are in peak season. And Juna, I see you like brown sugar in your baking. Now you know the trick to fix it. And I'm going to make some noise for a second. And there we go. That's as easy as could be. You ready for a smoothie, Michael?
Yes, thank you.
Breakfast of champions. Dates, apple, almond butter, yogurt, and a little bit of cinnamon. is going to set the day right for us. Oh, we've got questions coming in, so I won't sign off yet. I'd love to get your questions now that I've talked through my top baking tips. Oh, interesting. Bato's asking, why does my chocolate filling get absorbed while making my cookies? It doesn't stay liquid. And I presume, Bato, you mean you're doing filled cookies with a ganache filling. A tip I would suggest is make sure your filling is well chilled or your cookie dough is well chilled. I remember when I was developing my recipe for my peanut butter lava cakes, I was having that exact same problem. But I found once I assembled them, but really gave them a solid chill, then and increase your oven temperature a little bit more, it set the outside of my lava cake so the inside stayed liquid. So hopefully that is some advice that will help you keep your chocolate-filled cookies liquid in the center. Tash Pastries, hi, can I use vinegar instead of cream of tartar in chiffon cake based cakes? Yes, 100%. When a recipe calls for acidity in whipping your egg whites, whether it's for a chiffon cake or a meringue, sometimes you'll see it calls for cream of tartar, which is simply acidity in a powder form. You can also use white vinegar or you can even use lemon juice. A teaspoon really is all that you need. Usually you'll see a recipe call for a 1/4 teaspoon to a 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar to add it to your egg whites. You can add the liquid acidity. Even adding a few droplets of water, it doesn't harm your egg whites. So don't worry about what the liquid does. It won't compromise your egg whites. That is a very, very good question. Oh, here's a good question, Sherry. Does the cure cream for the whipped cream have to be cold? Cherry, it should be. That's a very good question because generally when you're whipping cream, unlike egg whites that whip better at room temperature, cream whips to a better volume when ice cold. And so the cream that you add to it should be from the fridge. I mean, you'll know pretty immediately when it happens. And to your point, Cherry, I know you're from the Philippines and a lot of people are watching from Southeast Asia or the Middle East. If you're dealing with a hot humid climate, your cream will seize up faster because of the humidity. So you want to help yourself. Put your mixing bowl in the fridge or freezer for a few minutes. Make sure that cream is ice cold. Whip it and then get it back into the fridge as soon as possible. The adding of the liquid cream will help that if your cream seizes up before you even get it there, and then it will definitely help. And then don't forget I'm gonna give you a 6th tip, bonus tip. My top tip for stabilizing your whipped cream, if you wanna whip it ahead of time to use later, add for every 1 cup, every 250 ml of fluid whipping cream, add 1 tablespoon of instant skim milk powder, which is essentially pure protein. That holds and stabilizes the cream so it holds its volume. If you're using it to frost a cake, dollop on top of a dessert, or just get ahead to whip your cream and have it in the fridge for later, that really helps stabilize your whipped cream. Get it in the fridge right away and you will be set. Hello to Guatemala. I haven't heard from anyone in Guatemala in a while, and I visited Guatemala, gosh, when was that? Ooh, 12, 15 years ago maybe. So I'm due for a visit back. That's a good thought for a new episode of Food Travel Diaries. The food was delicious. Diana's asking, good morning. How do you keep rolled out doughs, the thickness consistent? Pie crust, cookie doughs, etc. Well, it does take practice. If you're new to rolling, you can buy bars that you set alongside of your pastry that your rolling pin stops on. But as you know, I like to use a tapered rolling pin. So if you're going to use those bars, and then you can buy them at different heights. So you can set it to 5 millimeters, 6 millimeters, 7. So you get precise rolling, which is key when you're doing something like cutout cookies and you want them to bake evenly and all be the same thickness. But you need a straight rolling pin, not a tapered rolling pin to get that perfect rolling. I hope that's a good enough tip. Anita's asking, I have a question here. Oh, would you like a smoothie, Michael? For eggless cake, can I replace milk or yogurt? I'm vegetarian, actually. Well, that's a very good question. The egg in baking serves an important function. The yolk is fat that adds richness. The white is protein that adds set and structure, as you can see in your egg whites. So when you're replacing an egg in a recipe, you need to replace its function, not just its space in the recipe. So my favorite egg replacement for simple bakes like cookies, muffins, banana bread is to use a flax egg. And so the volume of an egg is 50 mil. Yeah. So you need to replace that volume. So what you want to do is measure 50 mil of water, add a tablespoon of ground flaxseed, let it sit, and that water should be slightly warm. Let it sit for a minute, it'll bloom. That flaxseed absorbs the water and it becomes a little slippery. And that's what it's going to do when you add it. You add it at the same point that you do when you add your egg to the recipe, and it will lend structure and set. You will get the little flaxseed in there. If you're making something like a vanilla cake or a cheesecake, if you can have dairy but not eggs, then you would want to use silken or soft tofu because that is a pure protein. And the same, you want to use 50 grams for every one egg in the recipe. And it sets custard-like and silky and smooth, and you don't get the speckle of the flax eggs. That was a very good question to ask. Hello to Thailand. Oh, the Cool Banana says, what is the best after-school snack? That is a very good question, and I find your snack choices depend on your craving. And I crave salty snacks later in the day, but more like evening. I like something sweet at about 3 or 4 o'clock. So after school, if you know this channel, I am full of sweet treats. So a little sweet treat is also nice, but if you need something that's just going to be healthy and get you through to dinner, this date smoothie would definitely do the trick. A few dates, a cut up apple with almond butter, or if you're craving the crunch, toasted almonds. Michael often grabs a combination. He'll grab a handful of my dark baking chocolate chips and a handful of whole almonds. And so that way he kind of gets that decadent snack with the healthy almonds at the same time. So I hope you don't mind that I was giving you some healthier almonds options. But of course, you can go to any of the recipes on the channel for a great after-school snack. And the most decadent, well, of course, a chocolate chip cookie. You can't go wrong. Oh, now here's a question. Alice, can skim milk powder replace some sugar in a recipe? That is a very good question, and I don't mean to be negative, but no. Skim milk powder is a different style of ingredient. It's protein. It won't behave the way sugar does. And if you're using sugar substitutes, they are using an ingredient just to provide volume to make the measuring easier, but it has nothing to do with the sweetness. So not the best option. Using fresh dates would be an ideal way to replace the sweetness and the moisture in some of your baking, if you don't mind adding that color. And you can just puree them easily. You can also pour hot water on them, let them soak and soften a little bit, and then puree them before you add them to your baking. That's a great way to add sweetness without adding refined sugar. And I'm checking out. I do have to sign off pretty soon. I thought I was going to be wrapped in half an hour, but here we are, still rolling. And we've got plenty of you joining. We have well crossed 200 likes, so thank you. We're approaching 250. Oh, you know what, M Surf, this is a great question. How does baking soda differ from baking powder, and are they interchangeable? They are very different and not quite interchangeable. Baking soda needs to be liquefied to activate, and it needs acidity to activate. And when both are introduced to baking soda, it activates immediately. So if you've ever done this in your mixing bowl with your baking soda and you add your liquids, you can see your batter actually change and it feels fluffy because it's immediately activating. It is good in recipes that have a quick bake time or a high temperature bake time. So you work it, you get it into the oven, poof, it does its thing. So think soda bread, anything like chocolate chip cookies, anything with a quick bake time. Baking powder does have baking soda in it, but it also has the dry acidity in a cream of tartar like product worked into it. And you'll hear baking powder sometimes called double acting. So it does activate in the bowl, but not to the same degree. You do not have to add the acidity because it's already built into the baking powder, but it has the slower rise time. So once it has heat, once your batter gets warm, it re-energizes and keeps lifting things. So baking powder is called for in recipes that take a longer time to bake. And you'll see some recipes call for both. And that's because you need that double power. Sometimes it's, say, a nice chocolate cake batter. You want it to start rising immediately so you get that nice even texture, especially a very liquid batter. But your baking soda will expend itself, but by the time the batter gets warm, boom, the baking powder kicks in and keeps lifting your cake. So that was an excellent question to ask. Thank you. Juna, I don't know when I'll make it back to the Philippines. I would love to come back sometime soon. And hello to Bolivia. Use of mint in juices. What is the use of mint? If you mean a function, it's simply to add flavor. And of course, it has the nice freshening capacity to it. It kind of wakes you up in the morning, but it doesn't do anything technical to your recipes, if that's what you're asking. Oh, and forgive me if I've mispronounced your name, but Kajai, do I have a new cookbook coming out soon? I will, and you will probably see an announcement coming up on the channel soon. I have a new cookbook that will come out next March, mid-March 2023. You have that to look forward to. Is it a baking book? Yes, it is. Can I tell you anything more about it right now? You just have to stay tuned to the channel and I'll give you more information. Anoli55 is asking how to fix overmixed butter for cakes. I'm not sure if you mean butter or batter. It's difficult to overmix your butter in a cake. If you're starting a cake by creaming your butter and sugar and then adding your eggs, you may find sometimes, and this depends on your butter to sugar ratio, when you're making a basic cake batter like that starts with creaming your butter and sugar, or a cookie dough. Cream your butter and sugar, you add your first egg, and you should add them one at a time, and you start mixing and you notice the batter is starting to separate a little bit. It's usually because there's a little more butter to sugar, and that's just the nature of the recipe. Don't change the recipe. It just can happen. You do want to fix it so that you have a cookie or a cake that holds together. If you let it keep separating, you could end up with a baked good that crumbles a little bit. What I like to do then is take some of my measured flour from the recipe. Don't add extra flour. You add that right after you stir in the egg. It will smooth out the batter a little bit. Then you continue adding your eggs and you'll have a smooth batter base. So I hope that answers your question. I'm gonna take one more question and then sign off. This has been such a valuable lesson. And don't forget, this episode, my top baking tips, will be up on the channel so you can come back to it as a reference later on. Trisha's asking, why do her chocolate chips keep drying out the next day? Hello from to Romania. You definitely want to store your chocolate chip cookies in an airtight container. Perhaps consider the bake time or check the temperature of your oven. If they're getting slightly overbaked, they will just dry out a little bit. Of course, your chocolate, the reason a chocolate chip cookie is so good from the oven is because the chocolate chips are melted. Once they set up, it's not quite the same. But check out my recipe for chocolate chip cookies right here on the channel. My secret ingredient, cornstarch. A little cornstarch in the cookie dough holds the moisture to the center of it, and I find those cookies stay fresher longer. So I hope you'll give that recipe a try. Now, just a quick recap of my top tips that I shared with you today. We fixed over-whipped egg whites. We fixed over-whipped whipped cream. We fixed brown sugar that's solidified. We learned how to crack an egg with one hand and what the temperature of your eggs should be, and learned how to easily line a round or square baking pan with parchment paper. I've got a date apple smoothie to enjoy. Please go right to Anna's Food Travel Diaries. You'll see the whole menu of episodes is there for you. We have new episodes launching every Friday. The most recent was my visit to Yuma, Arizona, and I make a chocolate and spice medjool date cake. So cheers, thank you, and I'll see you for another live stream soon. Bye, everybody. Oh, that's good.